Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
You know what today is, right, Dan?
Today is Fascism Friday.
Everybody's favorite kind of Friday, besides
Yeah,
TGI Fridays.
yeah.
The
But, Mark, you look kind of warm and worked up today.
I was hoping we would just move past this.
What's that? What's that about?
I'm worked up about injustice, Dan. Either that, or I made the
That's what I
mistake of.
thought.
I started working out, and I tried to slip my jog in before the transmission, and didn't really factor in that I'd just be sweaty and kind of out of breath for a while right afterwards. So
there you go.
But anybody who's tuning in after 1 minute and 25 seconds can just think that I'm worked up about oppression. So that works.
That works.
Good morning, CK. Good morning, everybody else.
Yeah. So I'm Daniel Walpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
And I'm Mark Vinstrunik. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination. And we're closing out our series on the scales of justice.
Scales of justice.
Talking about the nature of justice in unjust society.
Yeah. Yeah, and so one of the things that we want to kind of kick off today, especially because this is Fascism Friday, is that, one of the things that is clearly happening in our country right now is that the right wing has done a very good job of occupying the court systems with their minions. Which will then make it easier, of course, to criminalize justice and decriminalize injustice.
Yeah.
Right? And this is kind of the flip-flop sort of backward nature of criminality and non-criminality that we've been talking all week. So, talking about slavery and our history is now becoming criminalized, right? It is illegal to talk about what actually happened in our history. They are trying to criminalize voting again, right? Having gutted the Voting Rights Act, they are now trying to make ways where the justice system and legislatures can just overturn the vote of the people. They're trying to now, criminalize abortion. They're now trying to criminalize protests, right? So, if you occupy the freeway, or if you chant Black Lives Matter, or if you swear at the police, I mean, these are all things that are being criminalized.
If you can't swear at the police, who can you swear at?
Well, yeah.
I mean, they're pretty much the reason swearing was invented. Anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, these are all the moves that are going to make the next attempt at the fascist takeover all the more possible, right?
Yep.
Because the last time around, you did have all of these, even Republican elected officials and judges who, wouldn't go along with Trump, right? They wouldn't invent votes. They wouldn't overturn the election. They wouldn't consider all of these lies and absurd cases. But if they would have, right, we'd be in a very different place. And next time around, I mean, there's a huge effort underway for next time around them having people in place that will do all those things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So, I mean, in some ways it's not surprising, and some ways it's still jarring that 53% of Republicans think that Trump is the true president. And that's a significant number of people, even if we know that's not 53% of half of the country, right? Like, Republicans are not half of the country, right? But still, Republicans are a sizable number, and 53% of those folks think that we had a coup. Like, we got to really inhabit that mentality. They think right now we have a false president who staged a coup because of the Democratic Party. So anything they do to dethrone Biden is kind of justifiable in their minds, even violence. And the only reason that there's not widespread violence is because it's harder to get away with it. But part of the law is about, I can't remember which states have instituted this piece of it, but like, not only are they trying to criminalize protests by shutting down the interstate, but to decriminalize running someone over if they're on the interstate. So like that shows this trend of like being able to use violent coercion to stifle what they think of as illegitimate forms of protest, while they can still say that they're fundamentally for free speech. In fact, if anyone's having their speech taken away, it's them. Like, that's kind of how they think about it. Yeah.
So CK has a very profound sounding question here.
I'm not sure I understand everything in here. What are your thoughts on Marx? I understand who Marx is. Camera obscura. I'm not exactly sure what that's referring to. And social semiotics in relation to justice and injustice. I like to think of myself as an intelligent man, but I don't know enough about social semiotics off the top of my head to know how to. So please help us by unpacking that a little bit more. Unless you understand all that, Dan.
Well, I mean, I understand each one of those individually. I think it's brilliant that you're putting the three of them together. I would never have done that. So, so unpack that a little bit. I mean, camera obscura is the camera technique of creating fake images, and semiotics has to do with how we construct, how language is constructed and concepts are constructed. So this is fun. I'm just sort of guessing what you're thinking about.
So if I'm going to take a stab, I would say something about how constructed reality and how that relates to Marx.
Right.
Is that right? But I don't know what. Yeah. So please, Gus writes, "Can't swear at the police. Can I still get away with ACAB? All cops are bullies."
Yeah, I think that you could probably get away.
But if you say it, if you have to spell it out, because if you just say ACAB, then no, and then
you might get in trouble.
Then we'll have to start buying basically the conservative Mormon version of hip hop albums, because don't they have like movie chains that edit videos like so? Front the police. We'll have to hear that from NWA.
But what's the other thing that's interesting to me about all of this, and this this court takeover thing is obviously very important, but I feel like one of the things that we're really seeing in real time with the Trumpian world and is how and people have been writing about this some is how there really is not a way to sort of stop this sort of crazy from spreading and kind of taking over, right? I mean, I hear people all the time saying, like, why aren't these people in jail? Why are these people still in Congress? Why are these people still going on TV? Why is this still being allowed? And what we're learning is that, basically you can get away with an incredible amount of shit if you're just a sociopath and willing to do anything that you want. And this is one of the reasons why when people talk about coups, they always say, I mean, the bottom line is, what is the military going to do? Right? Because at the end of the day,
it's the enforcers
that's the only institution that can enforce power by violence, right? And so in the 2022 election, if a bunch of states overturn all their senatorial elections and their congressional elections and say we're putting in the people who lost, and the secretaries of state go along with that and the courts go along with that, like, what are you going to do? Right? What are you going to do? And if at that point the military will not enforce the laws and kick those people out, that's how you have a takeover. Right?
Well, it's amazing how much, we've pointed this out, how conservative folks tend to equate legality with morality, except for when they think the laws are immoral. Like, everyone does that. But progressives do that too. It's kind of behind, like, when people are like incredulous, like, how can Marjorie Greene, is that her name?
Yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I always forget one of those names in there. She says
I try to forget
things.
all of her names.
Fair enough. When she says these horribly fascist things, people say, like, how can she get away with that? As though somehow our system is fundamentally just enough to keep her from getting away with that.
Right.
And really, like, this is the thing that I think there is this naivete that progressives and liberals have about the fundamental goodness of our society, that conservatives are rightfully and more honestly cynical about it. So they're like, no, we have to seize the roles of whoever has access to the levers of power. And we're going to ignore the areas where we don't think we can get the most bang for our buck and stack everything in state legislatures, because they can gerrymander this stuff our way, and the courts.
Yep.
And that's why they're successful. So we got some stuff coming in. Jim writes, this is a quote from Ben Rhodes after the fall, being American in the world we've made. Quote, the Cold War that needs to be won now is at home. A battle between people who live in the reality of the world as it is and people who are choosing to live in a false reality made up of base white supremacist grievances and irrational conspiracy theories, and seeking to impose it on the rest of us. Seems fairly accurate.
Well, yeah, and this really, to me is this fascinating area, and I know that Viv is going to be weighing in here on the mental health issue. But we've talked a lot about conspiracy theories on our show over the year, because obviously that's been a big thing during the pandemic, and we love our robot birds, and we've talked about flat earthers and microchips and all that kind of stuff. And it is really interesting to think about and consider what is the world that folks who have embraced that live in. And to me, the flat earth is just the best example of this, right? Because it is so obviously false, and it's so easy to show that it's false, right? And and so that's why I often say, people that claim they believe that don't actually believe that. But whether or not that's true, what is true is that they have dedicated and decided to live in that reality, right? And to go to conventions and to make little models and to sell t-shirts and to talk about it and to, goof on people. And so that what that proves to me is that you can actually decide to live in this fake reality and then surround yourself with people who decide to live in this fake reality. And you will, commit to fighting to the death for that. And that's very, very dangerous and problematic.
And this, I can't, my brain cannot not go in this direction when you talk like that, Dan, which is, you just could have easily just described most experiences of Christianity, right? Because let's just be honest, there's a lot of irrationality behind pretty much, well, a lot of spiritual beliefs. And to me, the issue, and this is the challenging thing, and I think we need to really, again, I want to challenge this idea that it's just very easy to have, where we see that our relationship reality is one of making sure we get it right. So if you have the checkbox list version of how to be a good person, and then you approach spirituality that way, then you're going to just try to adhere to the tenets in a way that's thoughtless, that Hannah Arendt would call the banality of evil. And to me, regardless of what your theological views or whether you believe in Bigfoot or flat earth, whatever, unless we have formation mechanisms in our systems that encourage people to interrogate reality and be humble, no matter what your system of belief is, even if it's anarchism, which is my favorite, right? You're going to end up being a tool, like literally and figuratively. And this is why I get really upset with some leftists who just still have that checkmark version of reality, because that only will ever nurture injustice. Because at some point, and you see this in leftist circles all the time with male perpetrators, people who are sociopathic enough to perform excellently, and then they can find the levers. And again, this is what people in power are doing now. So fun stuff.
Yeah,
a little bit of a ray of sunshine up everyone's butt today on Fascism Friday. Gregory writes, fairness sounds good on its face. It does. But in a systemically unjust society, fairness actually serves to deepen and intensify injustice. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Speaking of which, I know CK has a comment here. Dan, I finally started watching Exterminate the Brutes.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense. And I'm, people have been saying like that they're surprised even HBO, which has more leeway, that they put this out. It really does. I mean, I could quibble here and there, but it really does lay bare the sins of America's past or Western society in general.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm also impressed that Josh Hartnett somehow is like the only real actor, and he plays this sort of like stand-in white supremacist figure, which right. I commend him, because I love when white men actors are willing just to play that role. Plus, he's from Minneapolis, so we got to claim him.
There we go. Yeah, but I think Gregory's point really is brilliant, because and so important and so unseen, right? And and this is where white liberals come in terms of being incredibly complicit, right? Because they so much argue for sort of fairness and niceness, and the courts are fair, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is great, and
the notorious RBG.
Yeah, and all these things are just terrific and are going to save us. I mean, I see every day, people kind of wanting to downplay malevolence and wanting to downplay the systematic injustice, and just say, well, if we were all just nicer to each other, like everything would be fine. It's like, no, that is not true. And in fact, that niceness and that idea of fairness, and if everybody just had a good lawyer, everything would be okay. That is inaccurate, right? Because the injustice that hides behind all of that just gets worse and worse and worse, and the fairness is a cover.
This is, recently, like I don't know, was it 6 months ago? You did that class on systems thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then just, we have a spiritual direction program we're launching this fall, and we have a class this fall on spirituality and social systems. And I bring that up because we fundamentally, like, it's hard for people to understand the systemic reality of this stuff. So like whenever I critique AOC, and let's be honest, the squad is the closest thing within American political mainstream that I'm a fan of. Right? It's not like I'm their enemy. I want them to succeed as much as you can within the system, even though I'm ultimately revolutionary in my politics. But anytime I critique AOC at all, people will get upset at me for being mean to her interpersonally, because they don't understand, like, look, she is a representative within a system, and the only levers I have is to really to encourage what I see as good and critique what's bad, and put my body in places to stand against injustice and support justice. Somehow, though, we still collapse into this thinking that our system is just the sum total of individual thoughts and prayers built large, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really a horribly naive thing. And this is where it's so bizarrely fascinating, if it weren't so evil. The right wing is the worst at systems thinking when it comes to their morality and their personality. But somehow they're the ones that are best at managing the system in the direction they want it to go. And I don't know how else to explain that except for having a deep spiritual kind of understanding of the principalities and powers, and how there is a mind or a consciousness or something akin to it within these social systems themselves that
Right. That
can,
perpetuates themselves.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's parasitic. It's feeding off
Hmm.
of these individual tools.
Yeah.
CK writes, in a way, our political system is set up in a camera obscura. Dems are good guys on the side of the people, and Republicans are bad, and it sets up a perpetual snake eating itself system. Yes. So there is this sort of
That's
like
what you were just talking about.
kind of the good cop, bad cop interplay, and then we identify with which team we're on. Meanwhile, the whole Overton window slides into the slowly boiling water of fascism.
Yeah, and I know that I've mentioned this before, but to me, the most obvious example of all of this that nobody's willing to talk about is, the war budget, right? I mean, Democrats and Republicans have never disagreed on this at all.
Not in any
Everybody
substantial
supports
way. You have outliers, but
it.
they're
Yeah,
not the main. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, everybody supports this, and that is the biggest outlay of our federal budget, and it is the biggest source of oppression around the world, and the biggest waste of resources away from humans. And everybody that's in our system is in favor of that. That runs our system. All right.
Viv writes this. I have to weigh in. We love when you do, Viv.
We do.
It always contributes to the conversation because Democratic leaders still refuse to consult with mental health experts who have warned for the past 5 years. Contrary to belief, politicians aren't experts in sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists, cults, brainwashing, psychological warfare, gaslighting, etc. Especially when so many politicians are actually psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists with no morals, no consciences, no empathy. Fitness for duty exams must become law for all politicians nationwide, starting with, and it cuts off there. Just a reminder that comments, I don't know what the magic number is, but over a certain size, it just cuts off. Just to jump to, Viv also follows up with this article here. I'll leave it up for a moment. Mental health experts have been 100% correct about Donald Trump by Dr. Alan Blotke. And there's a link there.
Yeah.
I mean, this raises questions. Like, I don't disagree. Like, people have pointed out, and I just saw a new article published by a medical journal about anxiety and psychopathy and the way that it manifests, and people are trying to understand how dominance affects your anxiety levels. Like, okay, so people are researching this, but psychology is not really there's still so much there. And you're right, none of this really goes into informing how we do our politics. And so there is a big question there. And I personally get a little anxious about having basically medical courts.
Right. Yeah.
I think the idea is good, but I don't know how to get there. So I think it's a great thing to bring up. CK writes, the social semiotics of it is about meaning, but now meaning has no real meaning anymore. Mm-hmm. Yes, and that ties in with what Viv's saying. Like, how do you do reality testing?
Yeah.
How do you determine fitness? And who gets to determine who determines it? I mean, really, politically, that's what the Supreme Court's doing, and that's being stacked. And so, how do you bring in medical expertise into that process?
Right. Yeah, and part of my critique of all of this, which I feel like, is very easy to miss in the sort of panic around the current day, right, is that this is not new, right? And
we've had some real doozies before in office.
Well, and my friend and colleague, Dr. Stephen Ray, who's the president of Chicago Theological Seminary, he always says, look, as a Calvinist, I believe that human beings are really screwed up, and that we are constantly manifesting that all the time. And I would agree with that. And I think that to say that we've got less reality testing now than when we were, committing genocide against Native Americans, I don't think that's true, or when we were hauling, tens of millions of people from Africa over to this side of the world. I don't think that's true. I think our reality testing was just as bad then. And I think that, maybe what we're seeing as we're becoming more aware of things like reality testing is maybe we're becoming more clear about how out of touch with reality human beings are in general. And that would be a good thing if we're becoming more clear about that. But I don't want to get into this idea again, that which is ironically something that the conservatives are always spouting, that, you know, things were better sometime back when. No, things were not any better. And this is, you know, in the American context, just the latest iteration of white people trying to maintain control and hurt and oppress people who are not like them. And you know, that to me has got to be the bottom line critique of all of this. And that's what our fascist takeover is about. And it's really no different than, you know, Hitler's idea of a pure race, or, you know, the Mandarin Chinese idea that only Mandarin Chinese people are human and everybody else are some form of animals. And I mean, you find this all over the world, and it's very, very problematic. You know, the recognition of others as not human is very problematic.
Yeah, and I think reality testing stuff, like, I think it's dynamic. I think there are times when our society is less caught in the throes of like mass delusions than other times, and it kind of ebbs and flows. And the problem is when things are, to me, it's like, to use the metaphor of Tetris. I mean, sometimes things fall into place where you can lose a lot all at once. And that's what we're in a moment right now, where we're seeing, like, wait a second, if you take this problem and this problem, this problem, they're linking together in a way that could be really bad. And maybe 50 years ago, those pieces would all been there, but they wouldn't have linked up the same way. And so I think that's where systems theory comes in, like all these dynamic pieces. The problem is, like, we have, it's easy to see maybe, but like right now there are clear levers that people can manipulate, and it's terrifying because we haven't built up responses to them that are adequate.
Yeah,
so
there are definitely moments of greater chaos than others. All right, we got to start rolling through the comments. We got a lot of comments.
Wait, here we lost one here.
No.
Get Gus right here, right?
Yeah.
Not that Ben Rhodes and the Obama administration he worked for did anything to wage that Cold War at home. Easy for him to talk a good game now. Ooh, bringing the heat, Gus. Yeah, I didn't know who that was. So thanks for adding some context. Greg writes, the modern conservative is engaged in one of man's oldest exercises in moral philosophy. That is the search for a superior moral justification for selfishness.
Yes.
Delightfully cynical. I like that.
Yes.
I'm there for it. John Kenneth Galbraith.
Galbraith. Yeah. He was into semiotics and all of that.
Okay. Yeah. Viv writes, one more. Pathocracy. Yeah, there it is. Really explains what is happening with the Republican Party. Pathocracy. When people with personality disorders gain power. There's a link here. Just go to psychologytoday.com and search for Pathocracy. You can find it.
Yeah, as we've said before, you know, the era of the Mad King is not fun. It's not fun.
No, that's we all learned that from Game of Thrones. Jim writes, thank you for your dedication to truth, to standing tall and addressing the major issues of the day. Mark and Dan, you make a difference. Thank you.
Thanks,
we try. Yeah. Catherine writes, super intrigued about imagining what justice without needing to be right all the time looks like. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, it's,
well, to me, what it's about is it's relational, right? And, you know, and Catherine, actually, you did this great thing the other day on Facebook, critiquing the critique of a meme about how to have a conversation.
Yes.
Right. And so this meme came up that said, you know, get used to not sharing your own personal experience when somebody else shares a personal experience. You know, just be quiet and listen.
Which there's a place for that, for sure.
Right. Yeah. And then somebody else who was neurodivergent altered the meme and said, you know, get used to the idea that a neurodivergent person shares a story about themselves to connect empathetically. You know, get used to understanding that. Right. So another, you know, right way of doing things. And Catherine, what you talked about was hey, look, folks, what we're learning is there's different ways of having a conversation. And we're learning about each other, and we're coming to understand that, people have different pathways to empathy, people have different pathways to helpful conversations. And wouldn't it be great if we were simply open and listening to all those different ways rather than trying to decide what the right way to have a conversation is? And so, I think you did a great job of imagining what justice looks like without that kind of rightness. It was beautiful.
Yeah, and this is, well, I'm not the only one, but point out the difference between politeness and kindness, or niceness and compassion. Like, those are different things. And one of the things that points to, like, when you talk about politeness, usually you mean a certain kind of etiquette that's external to you that you have to adhere to, whereas kindness is an interpersonal discernment. Really, all the fruits of all of the fruits of the spirit that Paul mentions require a discernment in interpersonal relationships. They're not externally derived, which is, that's hard. Of course, we're going to lean towards like wanting to have it codified so we can make sure we're doing it right, because nobody likes to seem like a fuck up. Like, I get it, but there's no escaping the reality that life has to be lived in those discerning moments. Tyler writes, as if the conspiracy theory stuff isn't bad enough, I find the well-crafted and delivered propaganda just as frightening. For example, one of the best-selling Amazon books right now is American Marxism, authored by a Fox News professional propagandist. Conservatives love to throw around buzzwords like Marxism, socialism, communism, etc., and equate them to everything they don't like without having the slightest clue what these words and ideas actually mean. "Quote unquote," socialism is when the government. I think I know where you're going with that, and you're right. There is there's lots of levels to this.
Yeah. Absolutely.
A lot of comments still ahead, so we're going to blaze through. Ellen writes, Dan, you just saw in the comments this week the effects of your influence on me, because I watched Exterminate the Brutes, and my professor friend was saying elite people are not really malicious.
Right. Well, thank you for the compliment. And yeah, that was a great example of exactly this issue, that Gregory brings up about fairness. Here's a professor, a white professor, who is honestly saying that that people in power who are enacting oppressive things are not malicious. It was like, well, people aren't malevolent, and it's to me, it's just staggering. It's a staggering level of denial. And it's one of the reasons, though, that there are these laws being enacted trying to get people to say we can't actually teach our history, because when you do, you have to come face to face with that malevolence, and we have to deal with it.
Cody writes, this is a juicy one that I don't know if we have time to really dive into. I enjoy jumping into these talks here and there, but I'm always wondering what you are offering as a campaign to give people an entry into dismantling systems. Mark had a Divest from Thrivent campaign several years ago. Well, it wasn't just me. I'm not sure if that is active, but it feels like needs to be things for people to do. I don't think that everyone who talks about injustices in society has to have a campaign in their pocket in order to do it. But then, that's one piece. But there are, right, if you've been watching for the last year, and I'm aware of the fact I could be engaged more, and there's been a pandemic stuff, but we've been talking about the different things we've been trying to do since then. But there is always an important thing of saying, like, look, we can't just be sitting on the side offering critiques. What are we doing to build into a just world? That's a fair point.
Well, I think that, one of the biggest things to do that we actually are always talking about, but it's a very much a reflection of our society that this doesn't sound to people like it's something to do, and which is that we talk about engage in the deep spiritual life with communities of people. That's one of the main things that we need to do. And that doesn't sound as dewy.
It sounds like sounds dumb, Dan.
Yeah, yeah, right, exactly.
Well, and part of it's because we know
Um,
we have all these spiritual communities around that don't seem to be moving the ball in the wrong direction. So when you say
but
we need to have spiritual communities of practice, it's like, what's church going to do?
yeah. So, and most churches are not spiritual communities of practice. But
Ooh.
that's one of the main things. And when we do that, and we do it in a way that authentically then pulls us out into the world, there are a million things to do. There are a million things to do. And there are a million groups to join, and there are a million causes to engage in. And so it's not, there are lots of people running around doing lots of things, and there always have been. And so, from my perspective, what is important is are we also allowing ourselves to be formed in different ways and transformed in different ways, so that our view of the world and what we end up doing is different than what the dominant culture is telling us to do.
And part of the, I think just to underline what Dan's saying, part of the challenge isn't that we just need more bodies in campaigns. The reason we don't have more bodies in campaigns is, one, because people have a formation question, but then we need, any of us who've been a part of any sort of organized tactic, you start realizing there's disagreements real quick. And since there aren't processes, whoever is the loudest mouth ends up pushing the agenda. And so what we need, this is the communities of practice, we need discernment in these spaces. And so a lot of what Dan and I are talking about is trying to bring this discernment practices in. That's why we're starting a spiritual direction program that's specifically organized around the idea that spiritual directors and people engaging in these practices should be doing it with groups, with social action as part of its. So that's, we're doing that work rather than specifically cultivating direct actions, which we've done that work on and off in the past too.
Yeah.
And support things
and that's
on the
great
ground
too.
now. Yeah, that's good too. It's all part of a system of response.
Yeah.
CK writes, exactly, Dan. It's the lie that they are both the snake Dems and Republicans, but to the people, they don't see it that way because of the design.
Yeah.
Ellen writes, geez, Viv, your list sounds like when Paul goes off on folks in the epistles. Big grin.
Yeah.
Gregory writes, so Walter Wink's trilogy and the powers is essential for understanding the principalities and powers. Those of us who want to frame freedom in strictly material terms will do well to acknowledge that there are invisible forces that shape our lives as much as bulldozers shape the physical terrain. Yes.
Amen.
It's a big piece of it. Wow, there's a lot of comments still here.
Yeah.
Just going to blaze through them. Sorry, we can't engage everything in depth. Actually, Viv writes, World Mental Health Coalition already has a plan in place for fitness of duty exams. It can be done on a nonpartisan basis by reputable doctors, mental health experts, etc. CEOs have to have fitness for duty exams. So why shouldn't politicians who make life and death policy choices? Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the premise. Yeah. I'm just wondering about how to enact that as a policy level in the United States, and how to avoid having that be seized by Republicans who gerrymander it.
Yeah. Like, I mean, to my mind, at least at minimum, it'd be awesome if we were like talking about it.
Yeah, like for sure, we need to start thinking, how do we get at that?
Like it would be good if we were at least talking about that.
I mean, it's in the Constitution that the president has to be fit, and we have no way of determining that besides politically without any sort of frame of reference. So I, totally agree with the general idea, and we need to get at it. CK writes, there is something very Freudian about white men in power. Sometimes a white man in power is just a white man in power. It's a cigar reference there for you. William writes, my imagination for how we reach a society of justice is so strained when we seem to so far away and we're so limited in time. It's anxiety producing for sure.
And the other thing to always remember is that the kingdom of God appears in interesting and wonderful moments. So it's both. But yes, it always seems very far away.
Gregory writes, many of our destructive theories about life arise out of a desire to deny our interdependence and therefore our accountability to one another.
Absolutely.
CK writes, get used to seeing your mirror neurons in social situations.
Man, CK, you're just pulling out all the
You're on a
stops
roll
today,
man.
You've got every intellectual theory happening.
I mean, it's all pertinent, but man, you're like
awesome.
Just total nerding out today. Gus writes, I'd love to read a book on the history of American Marxists. That sounds great.
Probably not the book Tyler's talking about, though.
Yeah. Catherine writes, also super intrigued to imagine what place the great love many people have of things like Disneyland would have in a liberated society. I don't think our need for play and dress up and fantasy and roller coasters is inherently oppressive or would just go away, but it obviously couldn't be a giant corporate carnival that exploits workers. I think
that's great. That's great.
You know, okay. I could say a lot about that, but good point. Ellen writes, but Dan, engaging with a community of people in deep spiritual life isn't sexy. Well, it depends on how you do it.
Yeah. You know, I don't know if we're there. Maybe it's sexy. I don't know.
Okay. Gregory writes, consciousness raising and social awareness about how things are and have been is and of itself a work of justice. Gotta face it to fix it. Jesus' words to Nicodemus is that he must be born from above, a revolution in consciousness and awareness that allows him to see God and how God is at work in the world so that Nicodemus can join God in that work. You know, and I mean, I totally agree with that. And at the same time, I also recognize, like, obviously sometimes there's a disconnect. This is one of the critiques of a lot of these books, predominantly the ones written by white people about social justice, where it becomes a cathartic exercise that doesn't intentionally link us to our social realities. And part of it because of the pathological formation of individualism and alienation that we have in our society. So like, I get that, but yeah, we can't, I've been in enough conversations where someone's just upset and wants the conversation to be done saying we're all we do is talk while people are planning an action. So sometimes in anxious, we just need to start dealing with stuff, and doing smashy can short circuit the necessary process of discernment, you know, and there's always a tension here, but anyways, Gus writes, Catherine, Cory Doctorow's novel Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom.
Okay, so librarian Gus for the win. All right, well, we've gone way over, but this was great. Thanks for everybody showing up and all the great comments. And next week, we will not be on. We're taking next week off. So we will see you in a couple weeks.
Yep, see you in a couple weeks, everybody.
All right, bye.